award presented to a student who represents the high ideal of a Catholic college education, although you do not have to be Catholic to apply for the honor. And the undergraduate academic committee will select the person on the basis of leadership and service to Pompey College. So if you have leadership or service skills and would like to add this little award to your resume in the future, there are nomination forms. There's one attached here, but I know I've seen some on bulletin boards around campus for that. So the deadline is March 23rd, so we have a little bit of time for that. Questions? The nutrient analysis step 2 of your 3-day food record is due on Wednesday. Anybody have any questions about that? Does it seem working, not working? Does it seem reasonable? I don't know. Those percentages work?
How do you find the percentage?
You figure the percentage.
Okay, you figure it.
You have to figure it. So you take your grams of carbohydrate, protein, or fat, whatever the case, whatever you get there, your 3-day average, okay? For carbohydrates, you're going to multiply it by how many calories per gram? That was a question. How many calories per gram we're going to multiply carbohydrates by? 4. Okay.
I did a different one at work. Because
How do you know it worked? Because it equaled 100?
yeah, it did.
Okay.
You said calories per gram, but you didn't tell us, so we had to find it for each particular one. So I added up my averages of all 3, carbohydrates, protein, whatever else, fat, and I added those up and then divided it by the calories. And it gave me like 4, an average for all 3.
I would give you an average for all 3.
Because it was like,
You did grams into calories each time?
like for my carbohydrates, my protein, and my fat, I added those up, those 3
Those
average
3
numbers.
averages, okay.
Okay, then I divided that by the average of calories.
But that would only give you one number.
Right.
Now you need percentage of carbohydrate, percentage of protein, percentage of fat.
Well, right, but then you plug that number that you got into the formula that you gave us on the page.
That might work.
And it did.
That might work. Plugging it in there. So
It
you
just
get,
took a lot less time.
shouldn't take more time, but that might work that way, yeah.
So you get your average for whatever, and then carbohydrates by 4. And that-
Carbohydrates by 4
and
to
that
give you
gives you-
calories from carbohydrate.
Okay, and
And
that's
then
the
you
percentage.
divide that by your total calories that you took in. So if you had, say, 450 calories from carbohydrate, but then you took in 1,600 calories per day, you divide that and you'll get a point, I don't even know what it is, 0.35 or whatever, and that'll be 35%. Now the difference is fat. How many calories are in a gram of fat? Anybody remember?
No.
We just talked about that last week.
3
More than
grams?
carbohydrate, more than protein.
Uh,
You guys?
100 grams
Huh? Calories per gram of fat.
for
Not
every
4.
100. Well, you wrote for every 100 grams there was 3 for fat.
That's for looking for a low-fat food.
Oh, 27 grams total
27.
and 3 grams of protein.
No.
Then I don't know.
Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram. Protein has 4 calories per gram. Fat has 9 calories per gram, and alcohol has 7 calories per gram. Remember that back? Right after they were not all calories are equal per gram. So your fat you multiply by 9, which is why I have to think about your method.
No,
That may
I'll
work.
show you.
No, I think it will work. Now if you say that, but it's like if taking two separate. Yeah, it probably does work. Now, if you don't equal it, last question on there says, do your percentages equal between 97 and 103? Okay, so then you're going to add up your percentages. If your diet ends up being 55% carbohydrate, 25% protein, gives you 80 and 120% fat, you equal 100, and you don't have any problem, right? Because you know that what you eat for the whole day. What if it only is 50% carbohydrate, and you only equal 90? Then what happens to the other 10%? No, you had to eat your whole diet, so you have to eat it. What might happen here is if you have alcohol in your diet, because you're not figuring the percentages of alcohol, then that extra 10% was the calories that came from alcohol. If you didn't have alcohol in your diet, it should equal between 97 and 103 when you add up these percentages. There'll be some variability, like it may not be exactly 100%, just from rounding errors, and that's why I gave you 3% on each side. And that's one way you can kind of check yourself to see if those numbers are adding up right or not. If you're within that range. Okay, so try that. And then that third page is where most people had the most difficulty last semester. It wasn't so much in figuring their nutrients each day, but when they went to do averages. When you're doing your comparisons for your paper, you're actually doing it on your 3-day average, because nobody eats exactly the same every day. So to say that my fiber intake meets the recommendations, well, you want that on an average fiber intake, because one day you might happen to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and have a very high fiber diet. The next day, you're out traveling around and just eating fast foods and continental breakfasts free at the hotel or whatever, and then you're not getting a lot of fiber. So it's an average intake when you're looking at are you meeting nutrient goals. It's not what you do each and every day, but what you do over the course of time. So it's really those 30-day averages that you'll be using to write the paper for that fourth step. So that's why we want those to be right. Does that make it worse or better? Medium? Okay. See what kind of numbers you come up with. See what kind of numbers you come up with. And that's the part that then I ask people to correct, and they didn't correct. So even if you turn it wrong, it's not that you're going to get full points. I'm going to say, correct it, and then re-show it to me and make sure that it's correct. Because those are the percentages, and those are the average numbers that are key to step 4. Any more questions? Okay, let's talk about protein. When I say protein, what do you think about?
Meat.
Meat?
Cheese.
Cheese?
Nuts.
Nuts? Good. Anybody else think of anything else? Somebody have like a French vanilla. What is it? French vanilla cappuccino or something? Anybody else smell? Oh, that smells good. All of a sudden I'm hungry. You're smelling these smells. Okay. Proteins are all those foods that Linda just mentioned. They are made up of long chains of amino acids. Okay, so where triglyceride was made up of fatty acids, when we talked about fat, proteins are actually made up of long chains of amino acids that are hooked together to form a protein. The amino acids are different from carbohydrates and fats because they contain the element nitrogen. So when we talked about carbohydrates only contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Fat contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Amino acids contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. Okay, so they have one element that's different in their makeup, and that becomes actually very important when we start talking about adequacy of protein in your diet. They actually look at the amount of nitrogen that a person takes in versus the amount of nitrogen they excrete. And not that you're going to be anywhere near that, but that's how we know a person has an adequate protein intake, is by looking at nitrogen balance, because it's only protein that contains nitrogen. Okay, so that's where that falls in. There are essential amino acids. There are 9 essential amino acids, and you don't have to memorize them all, but they make up a TV for those people who do have to memorize them. But for other classes, they make up a nice little acronym that I always remember as a way to do that. A TV till PM, and then the H just falls at the end there. Or there's a private Tim Hall kind of thing without the A, that people do that. So there are 9 essential amino acids, meaning your body cannot synthesize them. Okay, you need to get it from food. And they are actually listed, and again, you're not going to have to memorize. They're on page 166 in your book. Tryptophan, valine, threonine, isoleucine, leucine, lysine, phenylalanine, methionine, and histidine. So those are names in case you've ever heard of those particular amino acids. There are non-essential amino acids as well, like 13 or so of those. You can make the non-essential ones from the essential. Okay, so your body is very good at that. So the essential amino acids that we are concerned about, as a whole, we eat much more protein than your body actually needs. So you get all your essential amino acids. You also are eating some non-essential amino acids. Your body can make a non-essential amino acid. So people in this country don't have problems with protein deficiencies because we eat plenty. If we were in some third world country where our diet was all rice-based or, mush kind of based, we might not get enough protein. But here in the United States, even, and we're going to talk about a vegetarian lifestyle later, because the variety is there, we get more than adequate proteins in our diet. We don't need to worry about that. Since proteins are made up of amino acids, though, we tend to have people, or they're selling amino acid supplements. Some people believe they don't get enough protein, or they need more protein to build muscle mass, or whatever the case may be. So they're taking amino acid supplements. Does anybody know of anybody who's taken an amino acid supplement, or have you seen words like lysine, threonine, phenylalanine to take pills that are actually amino acids? Okay. There really are no data to support their use at all, that it makes any difference, because you get plenty of proteins in foods, therefore you break down those amino acids. The reason why most people take them is because they're concerned about muscle size, or that if they take amino acids, they'll be able to perform better. And that, again, no clinical trials show any improvement in muscle mass size or any improvement in performance by taking an amino acid supplement. They're very expensive. Okay? Just how we think that meat is an expensive part of our diet. Okay, when you go to the grocery store and you think when you have to buy meat, it's like, oh my gosh, here goes this big grocery bill. So we have these proteins in our food that are made up of long chains of amino acids. Okay, we actually break apart when we're going to talk about digestion in just a second. We're going to break apart these proteins into all their single amino acids. They're going to be absorbed, and then into the cells are going to be put back into proteins so that your body can use them. So they get kind of rearranged. They get broken down, and then they get built back up again in the arrangement that your body needs them. what does protein do for us in our body? What's the function of protein? Why do we need protein? It's actually like 9 different things. We need protein for lots of things. Anybody know? Sure. Enzymes. Okay. All enzymes are protein. So your digestive enzymes, the enzymes that break down the protein are actually a protein. The enzymes that break down carbohydrate are proteins. If you don't have adequate protein, you don't make adequate digestive enzymes. That's why some people that become malnourished have problems with diarrhea, because they're actually malabsorbing, because they're not breaking down their foods appropriately so that they can be absorbed. So all enzymes are proteins. What else?
Helps blood cells.
What's that?
Helps with blood cells.
Helps with blood cells. Actually, all your tissues and organs are made up of protein. So your cells are made up of protein, but so are all body structures. All tissues, etc. So you're made up of proteins. What does protein do for us? How about your immune system? Okay. Actually, proteins are also part of antibodies. What's an antibody? What does it do? Obviously, I didn't have very good antibodies, just still got this little illness. Right? It fights infections, it increases your immune system. People who don't get adequate protein in their diet, people that get malnourished, can't fight infections as well because they don't make good antibodies. Okay? Or they don't have, they have an inadequate number of antibodies. They make them, but they can't make enough of them to fight off an infection or a disease. So they are very important for antibody formation. Anything else? Anybody know? Hormones. Some hormones are protein. Insulin. We talked about insulin, we talked about carbohydrates, and now you need insulin to move carbohydrates into the cell. Insulin happens to be a hormone that's a protein, which is why you can't take a pill for insulin. You have to take a shot, because if you take a pill, you'd break down the insulin and it wouldn't work. So some hormones, not all hormones are proteins, but some hormones are going to be protein. You need protein for growth and for maintenance. Okay. Because all body structures and tissues are protein. Time to grow, you're going to need protein. You cut yourself, that needs to heal. You need to more protein to be able to do that. Proteins help with fluid balance. They hold and attract water in to keep it into your bloodstream. Have you seen people with edema before? If I say somebody has edema, does anybody know what that means? Swelling. Okay. Lots of people get it where gravity is. So their hands and their ankles. Okay. And people that have low protein levels in their blood have lots of fluid buildup around their ankles and sometimes even around here. Or if they're bedridden people, you're going to get a lot of fat in this back area because of gravity, which is where gravity goes. If you don't have adequate protein, you're going to not hold water into the places where it should be, and it's going to leak out into your tissues and cause swelling. So sometimes that is a cause of that. Use protein for acid base balance. Buffers and doesn't let things get too acidic, maintains the appropriate pH of your blood. If your blood becomes too acidic, then it's going to destroy the cells, and then obviously you're not going to be in very good shape. Proteins, there's a large group of proteins known as transport proteins. And actually when we talk about vitamins and minerals, we'll talk about ones that have transport proteins that move them from one place to another, so they transport or move things. And lastly, we just talked about it. With energy. Protein gives us energy. If you don't take in adequate carbohydrate or adequate fat, your body will actually start breaking down your body tissues for energy. Okay? Or if you take in extra protein that you're not using to make enzymes or antibodies or growth or hormones, then you're going to burn that as energy. So proteins actually do many things that are important. And for most people, they focus so much on protein that they're always concerned about not getting enough, and I must have adequate protein in my diet. And it is one of our most important nutrients. Page 171 in your book gives you this chart. It gives you about the 9 functions of protein in your body. And it actually, goes through paragraphs about each of those. The enzymes, the antibodies, the fluid balance, acid-base balance, transport proteins, energy, etc. So you have paragraphs that actually describe that. Talk a little bit about protein digestion and absorption, like we talked about carbohydrate and fat. We eat protein, we're eating a steak, we're eating a piece of fish, whatever the case may be. In the mouth, essentially you're just crushing it and mixing with saliva, and nothing's really happening. In the stomach, the acid in the stomach actually starts taking these long chains and strands and breaking it apart in what we call dipeptides, tripeptides, and polypeptides. Di meaning what? What does the prefix di mean? Di. 2. Tri meaning 3. Poly meaning many. So it starts to break down these huge chains that may be several hundred amino acids long, or peptides. Peptides are a term for a chain of amino acids, and breaking it down to just 2 peptides or 3 peptides or smaller than those 100 peptides. And the stomach acid does that. Then as these fragments move into the small intestine, the pancreatic enzymes then break it down into free amino acids, because you actually need to get down to those single amino acids for it to be absorbed. Okay, so you start with these big long chains, it gets broken down to single amino acids. It's the single amino acids that get absorbed, and then your cells use all those single amino acids to build back up into long chains of proteins again. So it can put them in a different order. Okay? And that happens in the small intestine, where you get absorption. The large intestine really doesn't get any protein unless for some reason you're not breaking down adequate proteins down to their amino acids. So essentially the large intestine is not involved in protein digestion, absorption, just like fat really isn't absorbed. Really only fiber and water can get to your large intestine. So everything should be absorbed in the small intestine unless there's some type of malabsorption problem going on. Yeah. Your book on page 175 gives you the same little diagram, same little explanations as the overhead does, so it's not a new thing. Proteins are described as either being complete proteins or incomplete proteins. A complete protein is one that contains all 9 essential amino acids. The sources of complete proteins in your diet are animal in origin, and there is some soy that is a complete protein, meaning they've added it so that by the time they put the soy product out on your shelf, it is a complete protein, and usually it'll say that on there, a source of complete protein. So if the protein contains all 9 amino acids, it's going to be considered a complete protein. So the protein in beef, the protein in fish, the protein in chicken, or turkey, or cheese, or egg, or milk, all those animal proteins, those are all complete. And then soy is the only plant protein that may be complete. Again, not all soy is complete. that would have to be kind of label specific, but they do make some stories. So if a complete protein has all 9 amino acids, what's an incomplete protein? What's missing one of them, right? Or two or whatever. Very easy, exactly. Incomplete proteins come from plant sources. So your rice and your beans and your fruits and vegetables, they contain some protein. What happens then with people that don't eat meat? Do they have an inadequate diet? Do they not get enough protein? Do they not grow? Do they not have antibodies? Do they not, make enzymes? No, because we're lucky. Different plant sources are incomplete in different essential amino acids. So when you combine those together, you actually get complete protein. And actually, I think this is in your book too, figure 5-7. But this is an example of, let me write down what page it is, 177. How 2 plant proteins can make a complete protein. The bottom of this gives you the 9 essential, actually gives you 8 because histidine is only essential for infants, but gives you the 8 essential amino acids. Legumes or peanuts are inadequate in methionine. In the methionine column, there's no protein. So peanuts have the limiting amino acid, or the amino acid that they don't contain is methionine. Then grains, in this case whole wheat bread, the limiting amino acid in wheat is tyrosine. Or lysine. And so there's nothing here. But you put the peanuts on top of the bread, and you smash it, make a sandwich, and what do? You make yourself a complete protein. Because now you have some lysine coming from the peanuts, and now you have some methionine coming from the bread. So people that eat plant-based diets or don't have animal foods in their diet or don't have soy still get complete proteins. Okay, so your body can still make and do all those functions that anybody else's body does. So that doesn't change. They actually used to say you had to eat foods that have incomplete proteins together at the same time. So you had to have, say, red beans and rice together. Now they're saying your body's so good, you didn't have to do that. You can have rice now and only rice. Then you can have red beans later and only red beans. And then you can have, a handful of peanuts and only peanuts. And as long as you're getting enough of these essential amino acids in your diet at some point, your body does wonders and makes complete proteins without any problem. Okay, so you don't even have to mix them together. A lot of people say you had to put them together and make complementary protein sources at each meal. And now they're saying you don't even have to be that specific for each meal. You can eat single foods, but then a variety of single foods over the course of a day or a short time period, and your body will put them all together. And that's not a problem at all. Does that make sense? The difference between complete, non-complete sources and how you can make complete, and so you don't necessarily have to have animal sources in your diet. You're still not going to be protein deficient. Is your book okay? Well, it's on your vegetarian. We'll talk about vegetarian in just a second. Then your book talks a little bit about food labels. If you remember when we did the food labeling exercise, the need to list protein was a requirement on the label. But what you don't see for protein is a percent daily value of protein. So that's where you're going to see like an empty spot in most cases. And that's because it depends upon the quality of the protein, what that reference value is. If the food source is an animal product and comes from a complete protein, the reference value is 50 grams. If it comes from an incomplete protein or a plant source, the reference value is 65 grams. So that percentage is always different. So a lot of times you just won't see a percent daily value on there, but you will see grams of protein per serving. And only grams of protein per serving with that. I said when we started that protein intake in general for Americans is much more than what we need. What is the recommendation for the amount of protein that should be in our diet? Anybody know? It's about 12%. And usually for most people, 12 to 20% is where we end up. I should call it 15 to 20. But the recommendation is 12% of your protein, 12% of your calories coming from protein. Or the other way, oftentimes you'll see protein needs recommended is 0.8 grams per kilogram. So you don't even need 1 gram per kilogram of your body weight. You need even a little less than that. And typically you would use a desired body weight. Okay. So, does anybody know how to change their pounds to kilograms? You know how many pounds you are? Divide by 2.2. 110 pounds is approximately 50 kilograms. So you take your pounds, you divide it by 2.2, and you end up with kilograms. This is approximately. I'm not sure that actually divides out, but I know it's close to that. Okay. Then, if I only need 0.8 grams per kilo, I would only need 40 grams of protein per day. Okay, so say if I was 110 pounds, no time at all to equal 40 grams of protein. And that's how we know that it's very easy to know that we get enough protein. If you look on page 185 in your book, you'll see a typical diet and approximately how much protein's in there. So even our grain products, or animal products, or non-animal products, like oatmeal. 1 cup of oatmeal gives you 5 grams of protein. A quarter cup of raisin gives you 1 gram of protein. A cup of milk, 8 grams of protein. Strawberries, 1 gram of protein. So just in that little breakfast of oatmeal with raisins, milks, and strawberries, you end up with 15 grams of protein. You see how easily people can meet what's required? It doesn't take any time at all. This particular little snack, or breakfast, snack, lunch, and dinner, 81 grams of protein. If a 100-pound person had that particular day, it's twice as much protein than they really need. And that's pretty typical. So again, we don't need to worry about becoming protein deficient in our diet. It really does not take long to add up at all the protein in our diet, because all foods provide little amounts of protein, and so that makes it very easy to get close to where the needs are. We're going to talk just briefly about vegetarianism. There is actually a spotlight in the end of your protein chapter about vegetarianism, because it seems like many people that decide to become vegetarian, or know people that have vegetarian, or I've had mothers whose children come home one day and decide I'm going to be vegetarian. They get all freaked out about their protein needs, requirements, and the adequacy of their diet. So, if somebody says, I'm a vegetarian, okay, or you want to invite me over for dinner and you have to know that I'm vegetarian, what's that going to mean to you? What does vegetarian mean?
No animal meats.
It means no animal meats?
No, nothing from an animal.
Nothing from an animal. Okay, Linda's going to make me a strict vegetarian, and we'll talk about the different types of vegetarianism. Does vegetarian mean that to everybody else? That I won't eat any animal products?
Well, they could eat. Some eat animal products from, like cheese and milk.
Okay.
They'll do that, but they won't eat the cow.
Okay, so some people go ahead and eat dairy products, which are derived from animals. That's a different type of vegetarianism. What else? Anybody know anybody who's vegetarian? Okay. What do they eat? Karen, you said, do they eat no animal products? Do they eat eggs? Eat milk? Eat fish? Okay, so this one eats fish, but doesn't eat, is fish not an animal? Depends how you look at it, right? Okay. So vegetarian means lots of different things. Some people just don't eat beef, okay, or pork. Some people will still eat chicken and fish and turkey, but they just don't eat the other. Some people won't eat any of that, won't eat fish, won't eat beef, won't eat chicken, won't eat pork, won't eat turkey, but will have eggs and cheese and milk. Okay? Other people won't have eggs, but will have milk. And then the most strict kind won't have anything that comes from an animal in any way, shape, or form, so only plant foods. So it can mean lots of different things to lots of different people. In your book on page 189, you have the descriptive terms for different types of vegetarianism. So, semi-vegetarian is they don't eat certain animal products. Okay, they've just decided, I'm not going to eat beef anymore, therefore I'm going to call myself a semi-vegetarian, or I'm not going to eat milk, or whatever the case may be. A lacto-vegetarian includes milk and milk products in their diet, but doesn't eat other types of meat, like beef, poultry, fish, seafood, and eggs. So lacto, remember, milk sugar was lactose. So if somebody is lacto-vegetarian, it's easy to remember that they include lactose, or they include milk in their diet. A lacto-ovo-vegetarian includes not only milk products, but also egg. Ovo, think about ovo and egg. So they would have milk and egg products, but not other types of animal products. An ovo-vegetarian is just eggs, not milk or other products. And then strict vegetarian or a vegan, V-E-G-A-N, will be the person who doesn't have any animal products of any sort. Okay, strictly plant-based. That would be the strictest of the vegetarian. Now, obviously, if you were inviting somebody over for dinner who's vegetarian, you'd want to clarify with them what they eat and what they don't eat, because it's this huge range. And a lot of times we'd get messages from the people in the hospital, from a nurse typing in, patient is vegetarian. Well, it helped us know that we needed to go see that person, but it didn't really tell us anything. We'd always have to go out and just clarify with them what they did eat, what they didn't eat, and then help them find foods that were available to them for that. And you could meet all of those restrictions and requirements. Are vegetarian diets healthy? Always?
All of the things we need stuff.
Okay.
Same stuff you could get because some vegetarians, they look kind of sickly at
Okay.
you look at them and go, healthy.
And that is true. We're not all vegetarian diets are healthy. Certainly, you can eat plant foods only and still be very high in fat. Okay, which again, some people eat a vegetarian diet because they want to lower the fat. But think about potato chips. Okay, think about guacamole. Think about peanuts. Okay, those are all plant foods, but they're all a very high source of fat. So you don't necessarily have a low-fat diet just because you're vegetarian. You still need to make low-fat choices. People who restrict all animal products from their diet have difficulty getting B12 in their diet. B12, we're going to talk about vitamins in a couple weeks, but B12 is a vitamin that is only found in animal foods. So if somebody who's a strict vegetarian or vegan and doesn't have any animal products in their diet, they may need to take a supplement of B12. The other vitamins of concern are vitamin D. We'll talk about vitamins and minerals again in a couple weeks. Vitamin D is usually found in milk. So if a person is restricting milk products, they may not get adequate vitamin D. Luckily, your body can also make vitamin D from sunlight. So if you get adequate sun, even if you don't drink milk, chances are you're not going to have a vitamin D problem. Okay, so usually you can do okay. Iron and zinc are two minerals that sometimes are a concern. They're in plant foods. You get iron from plant foods, you get zinc from plant foods, but they're not as easily absorbed as you get in animal foods. So sometimes people that don't have a vegetarian, or that do follow a vegetarian diet, have some difficulties with anemia related to iron. And then calcium. Again, because milk is your best source of calcium, I probably should write and do calcium together. You may not get adequate calcium in your diet because plant foods aren't as good a source of calcium. And so it takes a lot of planning to get an adequate calcium. You can do it, but it takes a little bit more time and effort to get adequate amounts. The other problem, or the other disadvantage with a vegetarian diet is it's really hard to do in the 90s. Okay, so think about just going out to McDonald's, okay, and you were going to be a vegetarian. What are you going to eat? You can eat French fries, right? Salads. You don't get a lot of options. Even if you go to some nicer, obviously, restaurants, there aren't always a lot of choices to do that. Or if you want to go socialize and you're going to a buffet or, an hors d'oeuvre party or whatever the case may be, it's sometimes very difficult to stick with that type of lifestyle. So you have to be planning for that. What are the advantages of a vegetarian diet? If planned correctly, I guess I should say. Plant foods have what that animal foods don't have?
Fiber.
Huh?
Fiber.
Fiber, exactly. Vegetarian diets almost always have the advantage of being higher in fiber than a non-vegetarian diet. Because in general, you're eating more plant foods. Okay? Even if you're just limiting red meat, you have to eat something to replace that. So oftentimes, they're higher in fiber. If planned right, they're often lower in fat, especially saturated fat. So the biggest source of fat, saturated fat, is animal products. So anytime we start limiting the amount or the types of animal products that we eat, we decrease the amount of saturated fat in our diet. And remember, it's the saturated fat that was worse for our heart. It was that one that's solid at room temperature. We talked about that. So it's positive to limit the saturated fat in your diet. So those are two advantages that is, again, many reasons why, and that's the last thing I want to talk about, is why do people choose a vegetarian diet? Sometimes it's to be healthier, to get more fiber in my diet, to get less fat in my diet, especially saturated fat, because the doctor just told me I had high cholesterol, or my dad just died of heart disease, whatever the case may be. Some people decide to become vegetarian because they want to be healthier. And those are two benefits for that. Why else might somebody choose to become vegetarian?
They just have a conviction that they should not be, it could be religious.
Religious reasons, okay. Joey, you say something?
They just don't like the idea of killing animals.
Okay, save the animals, kind of thing. There are certainly many people out there that don't agree with that whole thing and using animals for our sustenance. Why else? Sarah? Okay. Or they don't have enough money maybe. There's a cost associated with meat. I mean, think about grocery stores, and when you go to the meat counter, it's for this much meat, it costs a lot more than this much beans, or whatever the case may be. So economics is a big one. Okay. So there are lots of reasons, again, religious reasons, save the animal reasons, I want to be healthier, I want to save the environment, that kind of thing. All those reasons why somebody might choose to become a vegetarian. Each vegetarian is going to have their own reason. Each vegetarian is going to have their own level of vegetarianism. Okay, so you have to, again, kind of clarify that with people that you know that are going to say they're vegetarian and otherwise. This gives you the same things that are in your book, so you won't have to worry about that. The last thing I wanted to show you is the food guide pyramid for vegetarianism. It's on page 190. So just because a person is a vegetarian or says they're a vegetarian or follows some kind of vegetarian lifestyle, they still need to eat based on the food guide pyramid, just like you and I. So all it does is it pulls out the different products and puts in more vegetarian type food in the meat category. Moves into dry beans, eggs, not gluten. Okay. Then you actually get some example of those complementary protein mixes, like those peanut butter sandwiches that we talked about on the next page. So the food value pyramid doesn't change, no matter what lifestyle a person chooses. It's still there and can be adapted to that vegetarian lifestyle. Okay, questions on protein? We all know we get plenty of it. We all know food sources of them. Wednesday, we're going to combine water and alcohol, and they're like little parts of different pages in your book. So check your syllabus for what pages it covers. So we're going to cover water and alcohol together. Oh, Michelle Skinner, Laura Manson, and Kathy Porter. You can come up here and sign off on your thing, and I have some papers for you.
So that is a fraction, so right away it's got to be tenths count. Now think what you could do with your timeshare. Could you not sell your month of July? Sure. Could you not die and leave the month of July to your kids or your family? Sure. So all the things, again, we're talking about with respect to the ownership of the property would also apply to, again, a timeshare. Number 34, Carr and Old Boy Store Building took title as joint tenants. Carr died testate. Testate means with a will. With a will. If he died intestate, it means no will. And the guy that writes the will, in other words, if you leave a will, you're called the testator. O-R. So, Carr and Old Boy Store Building took title as joint tenants. Carr died testate. Dole now owns the store. How? All right. There are two guys that own a store. One dies. One dies. How many are left if one dies, Laurie? One. And what's the word for one? Several. Busy.
Why wouldn't it be a common?
Yeah, well, it's not right.
It won't be in common.
Why is it not right, though? I mean, I don't understand. Well, because there's no joint tenant left. It's destroyed. You've got, as a joint tenant, okay. You got two, one dies, you're down to one. The word subtlety. Just as simple as that. It has no, you've got to have two or more to be joint or tenants in common or entirety. And when you have two and you're down to one, those three are gone. And the word is subtlety. 35, man spends the same 3 months in his fee simple Florida condominium each year. This type of arrangement, again, is commonly known as B timeshare. Now, A, B, and C held title is joint tenants. C died, and B sold his interest to D. So here, now C dies, correct? Now we're down to two. Survivorship. Now B wants to sell his property. Now, if there's two left and they own this, and everybody owns it all, and they're going to divide it up, isn't it safe to say that if you were going to divide it, that one guy would take half and the other guy would take half? Anybody disagree with that? Okay. He says, I want to get out. I'm tired of farming. I want to take my half and sell it to D. How does D hold title? A. So now D and A are now tenants in common. Yeah. C's going to sell his half to D. When he sells his half to D, there's a fraction. Tenants in common. Second thing is, D is coming in years later. What do we know about joint tenancy? Everybody has to take the title at the same time, on the same piece of paper, etc. So the only way he can come in is under tenants in common. Now, both of these people have the right to sell their half again to somebody else, will their half if they die, etc. So, in answer C, A and D are now tenants in common.
On 34, after this person got in
Well, they do not.
they just,
It's joint tenants on the deed still, with one guy deceased.
okay.
And you could actually go back and change it all, the answer is yes, but just remember, Laurie, nothing happens automatically. You own it with somebody else, and it's jointly, but then well, where's to somebody else? Well, he passed away 6 months ago. So you're still down with one. Two or more. You could have 10 people, and one dies, how many own it? 9. 2 more die, how many own it? 7. You keep going until there's one guy left, and he gets the whole thing. 37. ABC Incorporated was organized with 5 stockholders. 5 stockholders. How would ABC Incorporated take title to the property? Right? I think D. Correct. Several things. Remember we said yesterday, a corporation is a single legal entity. So if Monsanto buys a piece of property, it's several things. So they're just making this a little bit more confusing, make you think a little more. Just says ABC Incorporated, and you have 5 stockholders, which has no bearing on the question. But you could look at it and say, oh, there's 5 people, so it can't be several people. So they throw those in as a distractor here. Number 38. We're going to kind of switch on a couple of these, again, to start touching on condominiums. A commercial building where offices are owned individually, but the common areas are shared, is called a what? Commercial building. Question. Now let's look at this. It's not joint tenancy, because we don't know how many people own it, what have you. So limit. Have I said anything, or have we read anything yet in the book about commonality of tenancy? In fact, I don't even know what it means. It might not even mean anything. But now we're down to A and we're down to B. So some of you do not know what the word cooperative is, which you will know when the next question comes up. But the answer to the question is A. There are quite a few condominiums around St. Louis that are commercial properties. Most people think of condos as someplace you live. 141 in Olive, Woods Mill and Olive. Big Deerbergs on the corner there for Chesterfield, if anybody's familiar with that area. And right across the street from Deerbergs is a restaurant called Spiro's Restaurant. Right next to that is the office complex called the Pines. It's been there maybe 10 years, nice office, about 3 stories high. In fact, my insurance agent has an office there. That is a condominium. So you went on to open up an office, you go in, and he owns half of the 3rd floor. He bought that much space. So it's just like a regular condo. He has fee simple title to the ownership. He pays a condo fee every month, which takes care of the parking lot, cleaning the halls and repairs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. He can sell it just like a condo. So again, it does apply to commercial property, not just residential. So if you didn't know it before, you know it now. Answer A on number 30. Before we go on to 39, and I'll give you the answer to 39, it is D as in dog, a cooperative. Anybody in here know what a cooperative is? Heard of it, or? I've heard of it, but I don't. Cooperatives, well, most of us don't, because it's not popular at all in St. Louis. A cooperative is a form of ownership. Let me just give you a 1-minute history. Cooperatives are popular in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, places like this, way up in the East Coast. You go back to like 1900 in this country, most of the people lived in the East Coast, and of course it was kind of like you were either wealthy or you were poor. There was no happy medium. And if you're wealthy, you were able to own property. But if you weren't, you were basically a renter. So the government is the one that kind of set up this system, and you don't have to take these notes downward, so you understand. People that rent, of course, didn't have any interest to subtract off of their income taxes, didn't have any taxes, property taxes to deduct, and et cetera. So they formed a form of ownership that will allow people to buy a piece of property, but not take fee simple ownership like we do on a home or a condominium, where you own the ground, below the ground, above the ground, you got all these bundle rights. That's fee simple. They allowed people to buy stock in an apartment type of complex. So for example, let's say a group of investors, management people, whatever, they would either build a new building, or they would go out and buy an apartment and then reconvert it over. They would go to the bank, these investors, and they would take fee simple title to the building, give a loan at the bank, pay their taxes at the end of the year, insurance, etc., just like you and I on our home. But instead of renting out all of these units like an apartment, they sold stock. And if you bought a share of stock, you bought a unit. And you had ownership of that unit. And as long as you held on to that share of stock, you could live there. So it's kind of like buying a long-term lease. Now, they got very popular because they were very inexpensive. You could go and buy like a one-bedroom, one-bath apartment unit for, let's say, $25,000, $35,000, which was pretty cheap. And of course, you then own this, and then every month you still had to pay a fee to the owners, the investors, the people that own the building. And in that fee, let's say $500 a month, would be part of your principal, part of your interest, part of your taxes, and the maintenance, etc. So let's say that there was this 100-unit apartment complex, one-bedroom, one-bath units. So everybody bought one, and now every month they had to pay their $500 to the owners. Then when the owners collected all that money, then the owners then had to pay back the bank every month, which is the mortgage, they had to pay their taxes and insurance, etc. Now, there were a couple things that were bad about these. One was they had a restricted right to sell. If you wanted to sell your stock, you couldn't just put up a for sale sign and sell it to anybody who wanted to buy it. The clauses in those first 20 years basically said, you bought it from the owners for $25,000. When you wanted to sell it, you had to sell it back to the owners, and they'd give you back the $25,000. So there was no form of an investment there as far as getting appreciation of your money. So a lot of people didn't like that. The other thing that you had to worry about is that you had to worry about your neighbors paying their fees every month. Because collectively, all 100 people had to pay their fee. And if a lot of people aren't paying, then the owners are not going to have enough to pay back the mortgage every month. And this is what happens when the Depression came in 29, 30, 31. You know, about half the people in New York or in the East Coast were out of work. And some were out of work for 6 months or a year and a half. And then what happened? They weren't able to make that monthly payment. So they're getting in half of the payments out of these 100 people. And of course the owners didn't have enough to pay back the mortgage, and what did the banks do? Foreclosed. So they foreclosed on the whole building. Which means everybody was out on the street. All 100 people, all 100 families, or whoever was living. Even the ones that paid, and then you lost it all. So you always had to worry about your neighbor paying their fair share. Now they have changed a lot of that, but there is still a restricted right to sell. There are a few co-ops left in St. Louis, about a half a dozen or so. Most of them are down in the central West End area. They were kind of popular here in the 30s and 40s. And now there's been nothing that I know of, any new ones built probably in the last 40 years or so. If you know where the Chase Hotel is, Lindell, Forest Park, Kings Highway, in that area, if you drive around there, you see a lot of these, maybe 3-story, 2-story, 3-story, these kind of brownstone, graystone buildings that look kind of like apartments. A lot of them have awnings. That was kind of a high rent district, again, about 40 years ago. Now, majority of those at that time were cooperatives, 16-unit co-op, 32-unit co-op. At that time, most of them had been converted over either to apartments, and some of them have been converted over to condominium, as we know it today. But there are still, again, about a half a dozen of these cooperatives still around. Now, one of the things that's still bad about them, it's still a restricted right to sell, but you don't have to sell it back, yes, even now. But you do not have to sell it back to the people that own the building. What the restriction is now, and it just depends on the individual co-op, is that when you want to sell it to somebody, the other owners have a right to vote on your buyer. So if they don't like your buyer, and they go thumbs down, that buyer is not going to be in there. Then there has been considerable challenges under federal fair housing because it's a form of discrimination at that point. A lot of them have lost, but some of them have won, and I'm not knowledgeable enough to tell you why they won or how they won because I just didn't take the time to research it. But it is more of a restricted right to sell. Now, the type of question you can get on the test is they throw in questions about what is the difference between a condo and a co-op. Well, when you think of a condominium, we in real estate look at a condo just like a house. Fee simple title, you got all your bundle of rights, and it's the same way with a condo. When you buy a condominium and you don't pay your bills, the bank forecloses on you. They don't foreclose on your neighbor. So you don't have to rely on your neighbors to pay their share. Condominium, there is common ground, common walkways, driveways, swimming pool, tennis courts, etc. And of course, we said yesterday that you would own this common ground as, again, tenants in common. You'd have 1% ownership, and the other guy'd have 1%, and of course, a percent is a fraction. There is no common elements in a co-op. So if you see common elements, common ground in a question, it applies to condos. It does not apply to houses. When you buy a co-op, you are buying stock. When you buy a condo, you are buying fee simple ownership. Big difference between the two. What kind of property is stock? Personal property, sure. So a co-op is considered to be personal property. That question way back, what kind of property is a lease? A lease is all personal property. You don't own anything. It's a piece of paper that you walk around. It's the same way with a co-op. Stock is considered personal property, not real property. Okay, now, we'll get into a couple other questions. I'll give you a little bit more further explanation. Let's look at number 39. Laura occupies an apartment in a multi-unit building. Each month she pays the association, in other words, the owners, the investors, whoever, an assessment for her share of the mortgage, the taxes, and the maintenance. The form of ownership that Laura shares with the other unit owners is called a D cooperative. Okay, number 40. Yes.
As far as the question goes for the test, I still don't understand what separates it from the common.
The key to this question is each month she pays one bill, Frank, and in that payment is her mortgage, her taxes, and her maintenance. When you own
The
a
key is really the property taxes, right?
well,
On a condominium, you don't pay property taxes, you pay it at the end of the year, don't you?
condominium, think of your house. Can you not write 3 or 4 checks every month or whatever? Could you or do whatever with your taxes at the end of the year? Could you not pay your homeowner's insurance on a monthly basis? Your condo fee over here? So you're writing 3 or 4 different checks, but when you own a co-op, you make one check and everything is in that check. So that's the key to set that up. What is the point that they're saying here? The form of ownership that law shares with the other individual unit owners. You don't share the ownership of a condo. You own it. It is yours. You live in a complex, but you don't share anything. Right. Susie and Nancy wish to purchase a condominium as co-owners. Susie will hold a 60% interest, Nancy a 40%. Now you can stop right here. You see 60-40, what are we talking about? Tenants in common, okay? Now let's keep reading. Both are single, each wants the other to inherit her share automatically. Aren't they kind of talking about survivorship in that statement? Can title be conveyed in this manner? So right away, before you even look at the answers, you have to think to yourself, hey, tenants in common is 60-40, but the other way is right of survivorship. That's joint tenancy. There's not a form of ownership that gives you both. Now you look at the answers. And of course, the answer is C. Can they hold it, can be conveyed in this manner? No, because only as tenants in common can two co-owners have unequal interest, and unequal interest means 60-40. There cannot be any survivorship under tenants in common. That has to be joint. So they got to make a choice. Which way do they want to go? Okay, number 41, you do. Have it? Okay, we got X a single person, Y a single person. They want to take title of the property. They want each to have an undivided interest. And if one dies, they want the interest to pass to the other guy. Which of the following ways of taking title best accomplishes their objective? Well, we got two single people, so look at number B. X a single person, Y a single person. If they take property as joint tenants, then when one dies, the other one gets it all. Right of survivorship. B as in boy on number 40. 42, a corporation who purchased a piece of real estate as a co-owner with an individual. Stupid? Maybe. But you have co-owners now. Monsanto and you. Okay? How do you think they would normally take title to a piece of property? B, sure. Again, tenants in common. It's not tenants by entirety. You can't marry a corporation. And joint tenancy, that means you die, Monsanto gets everything you own, or they die, or they go out of business, you get it? No, it doesn't make sense. But tenants in common, yes. B is a boy. 33. In a parcel of real estate, one of the two owners was given an undivided 60% interest and another one an undivided 40% interest. Again, 60-40. What are they holding? How are they holding it? Tenants in common. Again, D is in dog. 44. In order to create joint tenancy relationship and ownership of real estate, there must be the unity or the characteristics of C. There's that cutesy little word PIT. P-I-T-T. Possession, interest, time, and type. All of them are in that answer. 45. Ownership and severalty. Look for an answer of 1. Answer is C. Property owned by one person. 46. Harper, Murphy, Jackson own investment properties, tenants in common. Because of a recent business disagreement, Jackson wants to divest himself of the property. If the three owners cannot mutually agree on a plan to settle the matter, Jackson may seek an equitable distribution of the property by filing a what? C, petition, suit. 47, along the same lines, Carr, Lang, Dole own properties, tenants in common. Carr wants to sell, Lang, Dole didn't. What actions would Carr take? Take him to court. B, file again a suit to petition. Number 48, before we answer this, you see the word community property. You may get a question on community property, you may not. It's not never being asked. Community property state, first of all, there are only 8 of them in the country. The majority of them are our western states. Texas is our largest community property state. Our second largest. California is our largest. All we have to know for the test is 2 words. You just make a note. The effort property
and the other one, of course, is community. Separate property in a community property state is that property which you bring to the marriage. If you separate, and don't commingle it with your spouse. If you got divorced, for example, you would get back all what you brought to the marriage, and your spouse would get back all that they brought. So that's separate property. Even if you're married and your mother dies and leaves you $20,000, if you put it in a CD with your name on it, it's considered your separate property. The interest is your separate property. But if you start putting it in joint checking accounts, or you bring your money to the marriage and the other party brings their money, and you take your money and you put it together and you go out and buy a house and you sell it and you buy another house, then you have commingled and you've lost identity of your separate property. And once you commingle it, that's community property. So normally what happens is community property comes into property that you purchased after you were married. And things are pretty much more cut and dry in community property states. Pretty much a 50-50 split on community property. Other states, like Missouri and the remaining states, again, you argue, you stand in front of a judge, who's going to get what, whom. I don't know again who Mike Tyson is, and again, if you kind of remember back about, whenever, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, when he first won the heavyweight championship, he was married to Robin Gibbons, and Robin Gibbons' legal residence was California. And I can't remember exactly, but Tyson was either from New Jersey or New York, one of those two. And if you remember reading, after about a year of marriage, he just had won the heavyweight championship and won, I don't know, 20, 30 million or whatever. Of course, now they're talking about getting divorced. And I think they argued back and forth for almost a year as to where they were going to get divorced, what state. Because she's from California, and that's a community property state, and she wanted to get divorced in California. Hey, 50-50, community property. So I'll take half of what you made. He wanted to get divorced back in either New Jersey or New York, because that is not a community property state. So he figured he could present his case in front of the judge with lawyers, and the judge may give him 50-50, but on the other hand, the judge may give him 60 and give her 40. So he was thinking he may get a better deal by not getting divorced in that situation in a community property state. Well, again, some of these states do have a bearing really on how much you make and how much you've acquired as to whether it's going to be a benefit from one state to the other state. Basically, if you know the difference between the two properties, separate and community, that's all you have to know.
Is Missouri community property?
There's not, some of the western states, Arizona, Nevada, Wyoming, Texas, California, etc.
Question. You own a piece of property. Why is it I couldn't sell my condominium without my husband after I got married?
Because there is such a thing called spousal interest. Once you get married, the law says you now own part of all your spouse's real property.
Well, then where does this apply?
Well, this is community property state only.
Okay.
This is just those few states that are community property states,
Okay.
but not in the rest of the states. So when you see community property, then just think in terms of your separate property. If it's not a community property state, it's not. So the answer to this question, of course, is which of the following would be considered most considered their community property? Of course, the answer is C, property they purchased after they were married. Property that was inherited by either spouse could be separate. Conveyed as a gift to either spouse could be separate. Property owned by either spouse prior to the marriage could be separate. But that doesn't apply to the other 42 states.
And what were the two terms used?
Separate property and community property. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, you said community property, you have to remember, separate.
Separate property is what you brought to the marriage. Community property is what you acquired after the marriage. Okay, number 49. Number 49 is just a term. 95% of all of our laws in real estate come from England. And back in England, hundreds of years ago, they were under the old feudal system, where the kings and the lords owned everything, and all the people living on the land were basically peasants, serfs, renters. Well, when they came across to America, again, it all was changed, where we had a form of private ownership. That word now is the allodial system. B is in boy, so it's just a term that's got to stick in the back of your mind. Currently operate in this country under the allodial system, which basically means when we buy a piece of property, we have all these private rights in the property called bundle of rights. And we own the property below the ground, above the ground, etc. That's the allodial system. Now, number 50, community property laws. Now here's where the other 5% comes in, are derived from the legal concepts which have their origin where? Well, I just did the answer, but I gave you a big hint. And the answer is no. B? No. Now think about it. Didn't I just say the majority of our community property states are western states? Texas, California. What's the influence in our western states? Spanish. Sure. Spanish law. That's where that concept comes. That's the other 5%, 95 out of here.
Ron, would you please repeat what the number B on 49?
49, word allodial. Allodial means private ownership of land. And when you think of private ownership, then think in terms that you own the ground above and below, and then you have all of our bundle of rights. Bundle of rights is just a catch-all word. Again, I think we talked about the other day. Just think of what you can do with your home. Can you live there? Yes. Can you enjoy it? Yes. Can you get a mortgage on it? Yes. Can you put up a no trespassing sign? Yes. Can you sell it? Yes. Can you die and will it to somebody? Yes. Can you control it? Yes. Enjoy it? Yes. Possess it? All of these things. Drill for oil? Yes. All of those words, probably 30 or 40 of things that you can do with your property, are referred to as your bundle of rights.
How about you have like historical restrictions?
Well, now that gets in. We have unlimited rights, but there are people that does have control, our rights and other rights. The government has certain rights over our property, and zoning would have certain rights over our property. So that's where historical would fall into things of that nature. So there are certain. You have restrictions in your subdivision that have control over it. But that is not the overall laws of the land. That is a specific law for your subdivision. You can't have a fence, you can't have more than 3 dogs, or whatever it has to be. Or this is a historical home, you can't put brick on it, you can't, you got to keep it a certain color or whatever. These end up with ordinances, local ordinance or national ordinance. Number 51, just highlight the words dollar and courtesy. Now, what Jane was asking before, this has to do, again, with your spousal rights. If you go back in settler days, again, early 1800s, we accept all sorts of things in our life because we were born and we've always had laws and we don't know anything different. But we've talked about when you got married, your spouse has an ownership in all of your property that you own even prior to your marriage. Now, there were times when we didn't have those kind of laws. And there were times back in the early 1800s where there were no laws to protect men or women when it came to property. Back in those early days, it was a man's world at that point. They fought the Indians, they fought Jesse James, the bad guys. They're the guys out there acquiring all this land. Now, what guarantee was there for his wife that if he died, that she would get any of that property? There were no laws. He wanted to leave a will and leave it to the dance hall girl in town. There's nothing she could do about it. So they passed the dower laws, and every state had their own individual dower laws, which basically said, and you don't have to remember the law, and there's a lot more involved than just the statement I'm going to make. It basically said, back in the 1800s, that if you were married and the husband died, the wife was entitled to a minimum of 1/3 of everything he owned. That was the law. First law was passed. The laws for the men. no laws for the men. Not until about 70 years later, into the 90s. At that time, women were accumulating their own wealth through inheritance, working, whatever. And the men just said, hey, what happens if my wife dies? What guarantee is I should get any of her stuff? So then they passed the courtesy law. The courtesy applies to men, now it applies to women. And it came up with the same thing. When your wife died, you were entitled to a minimum of 1/3. Now that has all been kind of changed in the last 30, 40 years. These laws in most states are still on the books, but they're buried. We normally don't refer to them too much anymore. Now we get into the normal legal system and the probate court system and what have you, which is kind of taken over in that respect. And this is what has evolved to the point that now when you get married, since these dollar and courtesy laws came into existence way back, you were entitled to a minimum of 1/3. Now you have spousal interest. So when you get married, your spouse can claim part of your property, and you can claim part of his property. Now the thing that's not cut and dry with the majority of the states is how much is that percentage. And that's why you go to a lawyer. And that's why when you get divorced, you try to settle out of court. If you can't settle, then you stand in front of the judge, and the lawyer pleads your case. So then he's going to look at things, how long you were married,